I think that we generally have an agreement what we want to talk about.
Well, yeah, but you're the one with a provocative thesis statement, so I figure
Oh,
you lean into
okay,
that right
good.
off the bat because that's controversial. I disagree with you, but I'm willing to hear your point of view because that's how we roll. I want to hear
Yeah,
what you have to say.
the idea of the thesis for tonight would be, well, let me phrase it properly. So, who works better for Putin?
Oh,
That would be one idea.
okay.
Yeah, that would be one idea. It's whether Trump or Zelensky works better for Putin,
Hmm.
or perhaps another idea would be just to give the background for both the ideas of Zelensky and the EU, as opposed to Trump and also opposed to Putin, because although of course there's some similarities between the ideas of Trump and Putin, I think there's a couple of items where there's a huge difference.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I would suggest we do. Well, that's a tough call because they're both pretty good. Well, you know what? The EU might be better for you because you're more directly affected by it. That might be way more interesting because I don't actually know what happens when it gets out of America's hands. We kind of wash our hands from it from one perspective. Obviously, we've kind of decided the other side, the Putin side, is well, we're backing now. But I'm kind of curious to hear the EU perspective because I don't actually know anything. I'm sure they were expecting the Americans to toe the line, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, not only you guys not toeing the line, you're switching sides. What the heck is this?
Well, actually, if you know the U.S. Democrat perspective, the EU perspective is very similar.
Ah, so it hasn't changed much because well, so this is something I've been explaining to my friends lately. Well, one my roommate in particular, because apparently I found a lot of people that actually are humoring me now, which really surprises me. Normally, they don't give a sniff what I think, but this time seems to be different. So talking about oh the switch. Oh, EU isn't any different than America. Well, in the EU case, well, like Poland in particular, for example, that's the best example. They are directly affected by it because, quite frankly, if something happens to Ukraine, it's not a great leap to say that Poland's going to be like the next target. Although it may never happen. Now this thing is like directly on their border, and they actually have to pay attention to it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, yes, I was also thinking about the EU hardcore, meaning the EU Commission and Germany, France, and England, or
Oh,
Britain,
okay. All right.
or
Yeah,
or
that's
actually,
probably yeah, that's probably a better discussion because it's not directly on their border, but it is close enough for I have to pay attention to it. So they have a little more skin in the game than like the United States does. The U.S. can just walk away from it, and nothing more comes of it. They could, which seems like what they're doing is walking away from it at this point.
well, for instance, do you think walking away from it is a bad idea? That's the question, because
Eh,
I s- I see in terms of the Trump government, I very much see it wanting to walk away from it with as much damage control as possible. While
hmm.
for Europe, I mean the EU, the globalist side, they seem to be doubling down.
Hmm. So let's see. From Trump's perspective, I'm just going to ignore the whole crazy bit about them all of a sudden supporting the Russian point of view. We're not going to argue about that at this moment. From American perspective, it does kind of get a big issue off our plate. We no longer have to pay attention to this. And more importantly, if you kind of buy into the idea that Trump is trying to get the Europeans to do take care of themselves, it really forces them to into the game. Now they pretty much have to make a stand. They have to decide, yeah, we are or we aren't going to do this. Because normally it would just kind of hide behind the Americans. The Americans would take care of all this, but that's not the case now. So now they have to make a stand as to what they want to do.
And it's the thing is, realistically speaking, it's just whether uh, I am wondering very much whether they have the understanding of the current situation of the war.
Talking about Europeans?
Yes, yes. I think that
I don't
honestly,
actually know.
I think honestly that Trump has a very good idea of the current situation of the war. And I think that his team has a very good idea, but they're not openly saying it fully because I
Well,
think
I
they
mean,
can't.
yeah, I mean, I think the problem there is it's to the point now where in order for it to irreversibly swing towards the Ukrainian side, you actually have to put a whole bunch of military gear in there or put boots on the ground. And I'm pretty sure the Americans have no interest in deploying any troops to Ukraine at this point, regardless of what's going on. I mean, the Ukrainians are flat out running out of bodies at this point. So at some point, you're just not going to have enough people stand in front of the Russians anyways.
Yeah,
So now,
there's another thing that is very important that should be noted, and I think this is something that Trump is implying. Ukrainians have not mobilized their youngest age group.
and would that be 18 and older? You're not talking younger than 18, are you?
No, I'm talking 18 to 25, I think.
So they don't have
That's
a draft going on or mobilization going on right now? I don't
for them,
know.
for that age
Oh,
group.
okay.
And this is because this age group is very vulnerable and very small. Because these people are the people born after the Soviet Union collapsed and after there was a
Oh.
huge economic crisis.
So was Ukraine part? Were they still part of Russia when Russia broke up initially, or would Ukraine? No, I guess Ukraine came from the breakup of
Soviet
Soviet Union.
Union, yeah, yeah.
So
So
they
this
actually
is
were impacted by the economic crisis that broke out, because surely there was a massive economic depression at least in '91, I would think. Well,
yeah,
actually
and
earlier.
also in the 90s and in the 2000s, it's they never really recovered that much. You know, Russia had the recovery under Putin. Well, I don't think Ukraine had that kind of a recovery.
Hmm.
So these are, of course, their youngest, because they were born in times of crisis. Think this group is very vulnerable in terms of number, and
Hmm.
if this age group is sent to the front line, very much it's a question of whether existential things will happen to the Ukrainian nationality.
Hmm.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's I don't think that they have formally made the mobilization of this group.
So is
You
your
know,
idea that they preserve these people because when this thing ends, these are the people you're going to be growing your country, the backs you'll be growing your country on, because it's basically
well,
the
yeah,
young people that during the
yeah,
reconstruction.
yeah,
Ah,
yeah. So
huh.
this is something that I have understood Trump implying in or Vance implying in their criticism.
Oh,
So
oh, hold on. Let's stop right there real quick before you go
sure.
any further. Vance, easily the most unqualified person to occupy that position in American history. I mean, it's not even close. So to have him comment on something like that is basically like a Boy Scout going up to a room full of history PhDs and telling them that they're all wrong about history. It's like, what are you talking about? You don't even know what you're talking about. So in this role, to me, it seems like he's playing more like the distractor or the sledgehammer than like somebody who's actually advocating some specific course of action, because I don't think he really knows what's going on anyways.
Yeah, well, I would disagree on this
Okay.
because as I said, I think the Trump team very much knows what is happening, and this
Oh,
is something that I
wow.
think I mentioned last time. Um, I think that's who made that statement.
Which one?
Make peace, you fools.
Oh, is that a historical statement or not? Because
Yeah,
I've heard it.
I think it is. It might be even Ludendorff. And this is, yeah, and it's very
Could be
apt.
anybody because war is extremely destructive. I mean, you got to really be a special kind of not paying attention to miss how destructive wars are in general.
Well,
Or
yeah,
peace is
so,
almost always a better option than war.
well, yeah, but simply in this case, people opted for war. Now,
Yeah.
and and a lot of people are hung up on World War II parallels.
Uh,
I think they're wrong on many accounts. I think that this war more has to do with World War One or even your Civil War. In
mm,
terms of how it's going on. I'm not saying that Russia is implementing an anaconda strategy like
right.
the Union.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of are because they basically went in there and occupied all the super economically viable areas. So the idea was that if we didn't get this in a flat out push or a putsch, they just take it right off the bat. You now put the Ukrainians in a big economic bind. So the only way they really survive this is if
Yeah,
the whole world helps them out. So they're basically assuming that at some point the world isn't going to help the Ukrainians out, and then they will be able to economically strangle them because they have all the good areas.
I think I mentioned this last time, and it should be elaborated. Simply put, I think, although this might sound, crass or strange or
Hmm.
whatever,
Yeah,
Russia
well,
is, yeah, it's doing this war on the cheap. Okay,
yeah,
it's doing this war in a way that minimizes its own casualties, minimizes its own expense, minimizes its own economic stress, and simply uses time and industrial might in order to simply wear not just Ukraine but the whole of NATO down.
yeah. I mean,
And
that's a good strategy. The Russians definitely play a very long game. They play a
yes,
much longer game than Europe and the United States does. They've been playing this game, oh boy. Well, this iteration since the late 80s, but in general, they play long games anyways. That's kind of what the Russians do.
yes, yes. This is attritional warfare. So
Oh, yeah, big time.
yeah, so it's not just that you need to be able to uh, have enough equipment, have enough supplies, have enough men, and be relatively relatively be careful of your people's lives and
Hmm,
inflict pain on the other side, but also because you want to be as frugal as can be with your people. You
right.
cannot inflict any kind of major destruction on the other side.
Hmm.
So this takes a huge amount of time.
Oh, so you don't think they're actually just flattening places like they would have in World War II? Because in World War II, they would just like blasted through everything, kind of going about their business. You think they're being a little more meticulous? Well,
Very
they don't really
meticulous.
have the military infrastructure now that they had in World War II, so they can't really just flow things up in general. They can, flood an area for their offenses, but they're not going to like just lay waste to the entire country. At least
Well,
I wouldn't.
that was not the original idea. I think that
Ah,
the original idea was to come in soft, get Ukrainians to recognize Donbas republics, get Ukrainians to become neutral, to
hmm.
renounce NATO and get out and do
So
it as
you think
quickly as
that? Do you
possible.
really think the Ukrainians would have took that lesson, seeing as that's how they lost Crimea? Basically, it seems like they already know this game.
Well, it's I don't know. We know that the British Premier Boris Johnson came into Kiev to basically sabotage the deal.
Ah, was that in
So
like 2012 or something?
22, 22.
2022. Oh, you
Yeah.
mean while this current war is going on?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Oh, I see. Now that's something that I've been kind of neglectful for. I actually haven't been paying much attention to all their attempts to have peace. So I'm assuming they probably had dozens of attempts by now, right?
No. 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 Just one.
Really? Oh,
Yes.
just one?
Yes, and after that attempt,
Okay.
peace was sabotaged. NATO came in with a lot of equipment and a lot of help for the Ukrainians. However, the Russians ultimately managed to both, absorb the shock and then mobilize themselves, and they're now completely outproducing the whole NATO.
Well, NATO probably hasn't been producing weapons to a large degree in a very long time. That's kind of what the United States was doing. The United States was selling weapons to NATO. So, like, the U.S. was the one making all the weapons. NATO was the one buying them all. So, yeah, they haven't been producing things for a long time. So, that's going to be a bit of a shock when you have to start making your own weapons.
Yeah, and then we come back to the whole Trump agenda. Among other things, is reindustrialization of the U.S. Because one of the
by making more weapons.
Yeah, among other things, it's not necessarily that Trump is that peaceful. It's a question. I think he probably is, but then again, I can never. I wouldn't put too much money on it because you never know.
You don't really know with him. You have no idea.
Well, you have to realize that none of the American presidents were very peaceful, except for maybe Carter. Well, look at it realistically.
Carter, that's true. Carter didn't start it. He actually had. Well, it's true. Carter didn't start it. Where all the other guys either started one or continued the ones we had going on.
Yeah, and how far back was Carter?
Oh my gosh, 50 years ago. All right, now I'm going to think about this. So let's see. Biden, yeah, he was in a war. Trump 1 was sort of in a war, but he actually managed to finish a war. Obama was definitely in a war. Both Bushes were in a war. Clinton was in a war. Reagan was in a war. Wait. Oh yeah, Reagan was in. He had his hands full in Nicaragua, so he was doing stuff there. Yeah, I guess it would be Carter then, wouldn't it? Yeah, shoot. It's been 50
there you go.
Years.
So the first state that you would have to be worried about is the U.S. Obviously.
Yeah.
So
sad but true. I'll have to give you that point. We're kind of reckless.
There you go. So if one American president is trying to back off from a war, that means that I think he realizes that this war is unwinnable. And
that's an interesting point of view.
And I think that also there is the other part of the equation, and that deals with the Russians, and the other part of the equation also that deals with further interests of the U.S. So when you look at it, there's an interesting interview by an analyst called Mark Sloboda, and he's saying that Trump wants a ceasefire immediately.
Right.
The Russians don't want that.
Yeah.
And what does that tell you of the situation in the war and who's winning, who's losing?
The Russians think they have the upper hand, because why would they quit when they have the upper hand?
Exactly. So
that's good insight. Yeah.
And the fact that Zelensky is there, and the fact that he won't negotiate with the Russians. This is actually him
though. I don't blame him.
This is actually something that is very good for the Russians, because if Zelensky came in and said, well, I want to negotiate, I'm open to negotiations, we can make a deal, the Chinese, the Indians, the Africans would come into the Russians and say, well, why aren't you making a deal? Are you the bad guys? And while there's no push for making a deal, Russians can come in and work their thing and grind down the Ukrainian army
Yeah.
up until the moment of it collapses.
Oof. I wonder how close they are. They can't be too far away at this point.
Yes, that's quite possible that they're very close to collapse. It's just like World War One. So
Yeah.
the collapse
Actually, it's a
comes.
lot like World War One, isn't it?
Yes,
Hmm. Except they have more. No, actually, I mean they have airplanes, but it's kind of the same thing they had in World War One, really. Although these are a bit more effective than World War One planes were. But like, assuming they don't have a lot of armor anymore, I wouldn't think so. I'm assuming all their armor gets shot up pretty quick.
that's the thing. Simply, they're being grinded down,
Yeah.
and the West can't replace the losses because the West simply does not have that industrial capability.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the United States sort of does, but not really. They have to be kind of fully leaning into it, which they're not at this point.
And
Huh.
I'm pretty sure that both Trump and Vance know this. So
Hmm.
they want a ceasefire. That's why they want an immediate stop to the war. That's why there was a talk about war ending the next day, because the idea is, cut your losses and get out. Okay,
Yeah,
if
the problem you have with that though is that if you end the war right now, like today, the only way the war ends today is if you give the Russians a lot of what the Ukrainians don't want to give them. Like you basically say, well, you've occupied our territory, so we're going to give it to you because we don't have troops here, so it belongs to you. We're not going to join NATO, so you don't have to worry about that. And I don't, we have a limit on our army size, so it's like you're basically setting yourself up for the Russians to come at you again at some point. Which I could kind of see why Zelensky wouldn't want to sign up for that. It's like, okay, you come at us all the time, and now you want us to settle this so you can come at us again in like 10 years? Why would we sign something like that?
well, is from the Russian perspective, it's not whether the Russians will honor the deal. It's whether the Americans will honor the deal.
I don't know what the
And from the
Americans are
Russian
going to do
perspective,
now. I
yeah,
have
from the
no
Russian
idea.
perspective, yeah, you have to understand both from the Russian perspective and from the perspective of a lot of other countries. It's it's not whether they will honor the deal. It's whether the Americans will honor the deal, and it comes with a huge question mark. Okay,
Yeah, yeah, who knows now? I couldn't even tell you.
exactly. So from the Russian side, before they launched the special military operation, so in I think December 21 or January 22, I don't know. There was some discussion that they wanted to make a comprehensive deal with the Americans,
Okay.
and I think it had to deal with NATO rollback and also with Ukraine neutrality.
Now I wonder, I can't really go back 3 years, but I wonder if that would have actually had any sort of impact. 'Cause I think at the time, most people could not imagine the Russians actually rolling across the border, even though, the American intelligence community detected it and told them that. That doesn't necessarily mean anything because, we've done this sort of dance before that turned out to be a lie. So people are probably thinking this is going to be another lie too. And it wasn't. Do you think if they could go back that they could set a deal like that? I have no idea.
If the Americans said yes, but obviously
Hmm.
Biden and the neocons would never say yes. Uh, yeah,
I
so
mean, I
so
sort of get it because up until Trump, Trump won, pretty much one of the things that American policy just rotated around was the fact that we were rivals with Russia and we need to stop them at any point they blink. We need to step on them. I mean, obviously we didn't do that, but something big like this, it was guaranteed we were going to get involved with in some fashion because it's like, oh, Russia, we got to go after them.
yeah, there's a somewhat of a problem with that.
Mm,
As you, I mean, by now I think that a lot of Americans have realized it's like you can't go after Russia.
not
You know,
really,
you
not effectively.
and if you go after Russia, the Russians and the Chinese uh, will align
Yeah,
just like they did.
I
And
mean
now
they're
you
kind
have
of
this.
aligned now, anyways.
Yeah, so
It's
now you have the situation that Russia, China, and Iran are all aligned against you, I think, if Kissinger was alive, I think that he probably said some things about it. I don't know if he's alive or no, but I think that he would have something to say, because this is a huge diplomatic fail on the
Yeah.
on the part of the American government.
Well, you're also overlooking another thing, though, which usually comes into play with these things is like normally you tend to ally with people that have the same government type as you. Our government type has pretty much switched at this point. So now instead of this kind of pseudo democratic thing we kind of have a pseudo autocracy, and autocratic regimes kind of line up with other autocratic regimes. So now we're all kind of like all in bed together because we all have the same style of government. Whereas before that wasn't necessarily true. We had a democratic government or democracy in name. So you can't really ally with autocrats because it's like, well, we don't like your government style. We're going to go ally with the Europeans over here.
Well, I wouldn't go that far on account of this, because you kind of had a nice, good alliance with the Iranian Shah, with the Saudi royal family, with what was that, Idi Amin in Africa,
Well, yeah, things are
with
different because
Tito,
back in
in
those times we were
Yugoslavia.
kind of like the preeminent world power, so everybody just kind of had some sort of awareness, some sort of
Yeah,
relationship with the big dog on the block. We're not really preeminent anymore, so you can kind of do different shades of relationships now.
I don't think that it should be read too much in terms of the ideology, except maybe, just as in World War II, everybody was being aligned against the ideology of Germany and Italy.
Right.
Just so here now, everybody's being aligned against the ideology of basically your Democrats.
Our
So
Democrats.
yeah,
You mean our Republicans? Oh, you're talking about everybody that isn't Russia or China.
no. I'm talking about everybody mostly aligning against the ideology of your Democratic Party.
Hmm. Well, I'm not really sure what our party ideologies are anymore. That's a different conversation.
Yeah, I think that's the ideology. Perhaps the main ideology would be globalism, and also the other ideology would be that U.S. needs to dominate the world.
So
And
who do you think espouses that ideology?
well, that would be your Democratic Party, or actually the neocon wing, which
Hmm.
encompasses both the Democratic Party and some Republicans.
Interesting. Wow,
Yeah,
I don't have this perspective at all, but okay, I'm willing to lead into this a bit in our conversations. I'm kind of curious where you're getting at.
well, because this kind of ideology means that both there's not enough possibility that you can talk to China and direct it against the Soviet Union just like Nixon did.
Oh.
That means that you want everything.
Yeah.
You want to dominate the world, and this is not very looked upon very favorably by others.
Okay, I guess if you want to use that marker, you could say that. I mean, we are, I don't know. Well, you can't really have a big power without having some sort of rival. And we've decided that China and Russia are our rival. Well, China is our economic rival, certainly. And I guess Russia would be our military rival or political rival. I don't know.
I'm afraid that they are now both your rivals in a very strong sense, and
Well, they
and and to
certainly
be
made
honest,
big gains in the last
yeah,
10 years. I won't argue that
yeah.
point. Keep shooting
So
ourselves in the foot.
yeah, so this is something that is actually a very very big failure of American democracy, not democracy, but diplomacy.
Diplomacy.
Yeah, that's terrible diplomacy on the part of the U.S.
Well, yeah, that's funny. I was just talking to somebody about this at work. Our biggest issue in those regards is that most of the rest of the world has reasonably long memories, where Americans are lucky to remember anything more than 4 years ago. So if you're actually putting together diplomatic efforts, you have to be aware of what the people you're diplomating with, what they consider important. And most people will remember stuff more than like 4 years. So a lot of times, like if we come talk to Serbia, for example, the Serbians are all going to be still thinking about the fact that we bombed the crap out of you guys in the 90s, which Why wouldn't you? Because a lot of people got killed there. This is still in your memory. In the United States, we forgot that we did anything in the 90s, so we wouldn't even know what you're talking about, which is weird because we were the ones that doing all the attacking, but we don't remember that. So how do you diplomatize with somebody if you don't even get to the table with the same common understanding at all? Because you guys would be pissed that we bombed you, 30 years ago, and you should be pissed that we bombed you 30 years ago.
And because you have globalism as an ideology, you simply cannot go into diplomacy, because if it's globalism, then that means everybody should be the same. And what do these people want? What do these natives want? And why are they complaining? That's not good. Yeah, we gotta get ourselves a government that's gonna be a globalist government that's gonna be very obedient and is going to listen to us. And these natives, who cares? So this is not something. Yeah, so this is not something that the natives like.
Yeah,
obviously, and some natives, they got nukes.
Well, hopefully there'll be no nukes in Serbia. I wouldn't think so. That would be a pretty bad day where Serbia's getting hit with a nuke.
Yeah, that means pretty much everybody's got a nuke. So that's not a good idea. But
I could see the
honestly,
U.S. getting hit with a nuke, though. That wouldn't surprise me any.
That's actually, I thought about it, and I don't want to mention it aloud, but there is a somewhat of a possibility, not a huge one, but I think it's a possibility that Russia has a first strike capability.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think at the moment they're not. Less chance of getting hit with a nuke now because they actually have some exchanges and conversations going on, which is kind of your point. The point that we weren't talking before. Now here we are, like 3 or 4 months later, and they're actually starting to talk. So I guess that was your point, that there is conversation. So there probably not going to be any nukes flying right now. Well, just a lot of diplomacy going on, which can't really say that's a bad thing.
Exactly. So I'm saying I'm not even 50% sure about this. It's like there's a 5 to 10% thing back on the back of my mind that actually it might be possible that with the advanced state of Russia's anti-aircraft and capabilities, which are highly advanced, which are,
I would think so, yeah,
leagues advanced in terms in comparison to the American ones, that they might that they might even have a first strike capability at this point. And actually, because of this disparity in the AA capabilities of both Russia as opposed to the US, baiting Russia is a very bad idea. So
they're not baiting them now. Now they're actually trying to work things out. So we'll see how this.
Yes.
So I think we're gonna have to pinch that one off there if you want to have like a summation there, because it's been about 45 minutes. So that's
probably, really?
Yeah, it's almost 2 o'clock. Well, it's almost 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock your time.
Yeah. Okay. So my basically
time gets away from us when we're doing these conversations.
Yeah. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
Anyways, just to get back to it. So, but there's a potential danger for Russia because Russia has invested a lot. Putin has invested a lot in this war.
Right.
And if he does not look to be sufficiently victorious, that might go down bad for him. Okay?
Yeah, pretty much going to have unrest at that point, and somebody will try and topple him, and so he has to look like he's winning big. Yes, I agree with you there.
And I think that Russians are sufficiently strategically savvy to know that when they won and when there's a stalemate, which will ultimately come back and blow into their faces, because again, the West will renege on its agreements like it did numerous times before. So that's why Yeah, that's why the idea, Trump's idea on an immediate truce is bad for Putin. It's terrible for Putin because it will make him look bad if he refuses. However, Zelensky gave Putin a helping hand in that regard, and because he's not willing to negotiate. If he was willing to negotiate, Putin would be looking bad if he doesn't negotiate also. And there's a possibility.
Point.
Yeah, and there's a possibility
you
then.
might not be wrong. You might not be 100% wrong on that one.
Yeah.
So basically, you're getting Putin permission to not negotiate, is what you're.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he doesn't want to negotiate anyways.
Exactly. He wants to defeat Ukraine. He wants to get the W.
All right. I will say that you proved your point. I don't necessarily agree with you 100%, but you definitely proved your point. Backed it up with good comments. So thank you for that.
We'll talk further. Listen.
Oh, it's going to change in a week. We'll have a whole different conversation in a week.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm running a little experiment on the side here that I could share with you. If we don't have anything else to talk about, I can discuss this other thing I'm working on. So we'll have something related to this, definitely.
Oh, really? Nice.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was good. Thank you. That was wonderful as always. I gotta go. I gotta go run some errands, but it was good talking with you again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Barry.
We'll see you in a week.
See you. Bye-bye.